You know what a man's lie is like? A man's lie is like, I was at Tony's house. I'm at Kenny's house. That's a man's lie. A woman's lie is like, it's your baby.
Paris's wife cheated on him, so he was always checking to see if his kids looked like him. He was the first man in Bed-Stuy to get a DNA test.
The practice of passing off a pregnancy as somebody else's has been with us since the beginning of time. What the DNA testing is doing for us is bringing us to a point where we can have factual evidence for that.
Women have always been promiscuous and unfaithful. That's why chastity belts were invented. It's also why scientists believe the penis is shaped in the way it is, to remove other men's sperm from women's vaginas before depositing their own. Yet it's typically the man who's painted as a philanderer.
Men cheat for the same reason that dogs lick their balls, because they can. It's part of their biology.
Women cheat. Yeah, but it's completely different.
How?
Because we don't go around randomly attacking any man that we're attracted to.
Speak for yourself.
We're not driven by testosterone.
When women are unfaithful, it tends to be without the use of protection, which makes the whole thing even worse for the man.
And Susan admits she's not sure her husband Nick is the father of her baby. Now, if not, the father could be the man she met on the way to the chip shop after a rare night out on the town.
However, the prevalence of paternity fraud is much greater than most people realise.
Approximately between 10 and 12% we prove that the man who we test is not the father of the child.
On average, 1 in 10 children are not fathered by the man that appears on their birth certificate. But that figure fluctuates depending on which socioeconomic group you're in. So it goes down to about 1% of children in higher socioeconomic groups, and it can go up to about as high as 30% of children in lower socioeconomic groups.
In the US, about 10 million kids are being raised by men that think they're the fathers but are not. And in Britain, the figure's believed to be around 1 million children.
That means 1 in 20 children, or 1 in every class at school, is not fathered by the man who thinks he's the dad.
Look, if I was a man, and my wife has been on a trip to New York and she comes back and 6 months later she's pregnant, I'm going to DNA test.
There is a presumption in law that husbands are the fathers of children. That's the great presumption of British law. But I think when there's been any kind of anonymous research, statistically, it's incredibly striking. It's quite striking how many husbands are not the biological fathers of their children. And if you had a law where every mother was forced to tell, it could be a big can of worms, that.
Robin Baker, a biological psychologist, has studied paternity fraud and its effects. He found that it was a common occurrence and was demonstrably poisonous to family structure and the health and upbringing of children.
This is a great opportunity for us, Peter.
What about Reese, huh? You ever think about that? I mean, you want to take him away from his father?
You may not even be his father.
What?
He may not be yours. There was somebody else. It was just casual, and then there was you.
It has to be the ultimate betrayal a woman can commit against a man, which is then compounded by years of her lying, which can only be described as deeply evil.
But I don't know what's worse. That she's always known, or she's just doing this to get Reese.
Well, I got a paternity test. I haven't taken it yet.
How long does it take?
I don't know. I don't know that I'm going to do it.
You have to.
What if I'm not his father, huh?
It goes back to thinking about why families break down, or more generally, why would individuals be unsatisfied with their partners?
Often a man may suspect that a child is not his, but not be certain of it.
A few years later, we were having our first child from my own personal seed. There he was, Earl Jr.
And where a father is doubtful of his paternity, consciously or subconsciously, all sorts of relationship problems are bound to occur. It leads almost inevitably to family breakdown and fatherlessness.
One man, his child had red hair and he had dark hair, and he didn't even like to be seen out with it.
And of course, if the father walks out, we don't know the reason. He's just another example of male irresponsibility, another deadbeat dad.
Parental care is a very costly and valuable resource. We don't expect people to spread it about willy-nilly. We expect them to direct their parental care to their genetic children.
Undoubtedly, because paternity fraud committed by women is so common, it's not legal in this country to get a paternity test without the permission of the mother or a court order.
As well as having the consent of the mother, We also need the child's consent if the child is considered to be Gillick competent, or we use whether a child is at secondary age as some sort of guide as to whether they're competent. So, and it's got to be informed consent, so they must know why they're doing it, and they must know about the confidentiality of the process. There are times when we're approached by the putative father to test a child without the mother's consent, or they may say the mother doesn't want to give consent, in which case we won't do it without the mother's consent.
A man can only find out if his wife cheated on him and had another man's child with her permission. The government heeds advice that this is in the best interests of the child.
Why do you require consent from all three parties?
Why?
Yeah. What are the issues involved in making sure that everyone agrees?
It's a terribly important process. It's, I don't know, it seems to go deep to the heart. And it's very important that people are happy with that.
But clearly, in the vast majority of cases, paternity tests strengthen the family and improve outcomes for children because they can deliver good news by removing lingering doubts.
The truth, on the whole, however painful and uncomfortable it is, works better for the human psyche. Deception erodes our confidence in our own judgment and our relationships with other people, and that always has destructive consequences, larger or smaller degrees.
No man ever knows for sure on leaving hospital with his wife and new child that the baby is his. If women were forced to endure this lack of certainty, they'll complain loudly about this terrible abuse of their rights. With such high rates of paternity fraud, DNA testing should be mandatory on the birth of a child, so that men can have the same certainty of parenthood that women enjoy.
A man should know. I think it comes down to a man should know. It's not necessarily about punishing the woman. It's about the knowledge. It's about giving the man full knowledge. And I guess the only way to do that is to have a paternity test at every pregnancy.
But the government will never make paternity testing routine. It's not interested if the wrong man is enslaved by a woman, and they don't care about the broken family that almost inevitably results. They just want some man, any man, to pay for the upbringing of that child.
She's not my daughter.
Well, she's somebody's daughter, isn't she? And whoever it is, it's my job to find him and to make him support her. That's the law.
Government doesn't even attempt to educate women about their behaviour, nor do they even address it as a massive problem it is. We see domestic violence documentaries vilifying men every other weekend, but no programmes vilifying women for their despicable behaviour. I regard paternity fraud as a far more destructive problem in society than domestic violence. But whereas domestic violence is perpetrated by both sexes, and is mostly instigated by women, paternity fraud is an abuse exclusively committed by women, and it's one of the most evil crimes that exist. Domestic violence can occur as an understandable loss of control by a man or a woman. But paternity fraud is different. It is calculated abuse of a man for years on end. She lies and cheats him emotionally and financially. She's completely selfish, with no concern for the man or the child. But have you ever seen a news item about the men and children suffering due to paternity fraud? Ever seen a London Underground poster chastising women about it? Ever heard a government minister or police officer tell us about the steps they're taking to tackle paternity fraud? Where is our paternity fraud bill to go with the domestic violence bill? Society much prefers to concentrate on crimes where men can be singled out, even when those same crimes are committed by women. The issue of paternity is accepted as being hugely important, but everyone seems concerned only with children's rights and women's rights. Men's rights are ignored.
Do you think that paternity testing may be performed at birth as a standard practice in the future?
I wouldn't have thought so. I think because it is so deeply important, people will feel that it was an infringement of their rights. I can't see that anybody would be happy with that.
What I think she means is that she can't see how any woman would be happy with that.
taking the test can be life-changing, and our recommendation to people who call us up on a daily basis before they even do the test is, have you considered the consequences?
Any effect on the child are not due to the results of a paternity test. They're due to the actions of the mother. I would think that the consequences for the man should be foremost. But why is he not paying? I would pay even less, £0 a week, for a child that I thought wasn't mine. We make excuses for women in their duplicity.
Quite often I do find that when a man is not the father, the mother is very anxious about the results coming, and she will, because perhaps she already knows, she will be inquiring as to when the results are ready. She's more likely to ring up and say, "Here, why haven't I got my results yet?" But sometimes mothers genuinely don't know. Sometimes they're surprised because of dates, but there is always another candidate.
It's not that women are surprised or they don't know. They just don't care, as long as some man pays for their child. Any woman that dupes a man into raising a child that he thinks is his is an evil, sadistic con artist. It's an emotional and a financial crime. It's the kind of crime that makes your toes curl, and there needs to be a severe punishment for these mothers. But one man I spoke to thought not.
I certainly don't think that there should be any sort of legislation to punish women for anything like that. There is a penalty, or a risk of a penalty, in the sense that if she's found out, then there's a very strong chance that the family will break down.
That's like saying that if you steal money from your bank, it's punishment enough that if you get caught, the bank will close your account. Paternity fraud is such an awful crime because it has the potential to invalidate a man's life, to take his destiny away from him. A man might only have one child in life, which he believes is his and is his investment in the future and part of his family. To find out in later life that the child isn't his, and his line will end with perhaps no chance to try again, betrays a man's very existence.
My mother was an only child, and so was my father, and I was their only child. So when I'm gone, I'm the end of the line. My family will be finished.
A woman doesn't need to care who the father is. She fulfills her role as a woman by bearing the child. A man, however, is dependent on a woman to fulfill his role. At the time of writing, I can't think of a worse crime, a greater betrayal of trust, or a worse abuse of a man than paternity fraud. Yet it's not even considered a crime in our male-dominated society. However, if you were to slap your wife when you discover what she's done, well, that would get you locked up. That's abusive. There's no sense of outrage about the abuse being committed against men. When domestic violence is discussed, and wrongly blamed on men alone, there's outrage and demands for action and legal changes.
Lancashire have a very high arrest rate for domestic violence incidents. Others have a very low arrest rate.
But when paternity fraud is discussed, there's not even a suggestion of arrests or prosecution.
The answer is that lots of women are having lots of affairs. And a percentage of those are going to end up pregnant. Whether by accident or design, one could only speculate.
Well, I'm outraged by female behaviour. I want legal sanctions against these despicable women. Why is it that prenuptial agreements to protect men from the vindictiveness of women, and paternity tests to protect men from the unfaithfulness of women, are not seen, even by men, as being positive for men?
Dishing out the cold truth in all its glory isn't always exactly the right thing to do. One doesn't like the feeling that one day he might feel the doctors didn't tell me the whole truth.
Sometimes people's feelings possibly matter a bit more than being 100% honest.
But this relaxed attitude to the truth only seems to be the right thing to do when it's men that are kept in the dark. If done to women, this deliberate conspiracy against men's rights will be described as what it is: an evil, oppressive, sexist hate crime. Almost every man I've spoken to about this sees this as a negative issue of trust in the relationship. It's a bad thing for a man to seek a paternity test or a prenup.
One of the things that makes marriages work is sort of not just, it's kind of mutual interest and trust. And if you have all these devices if you're constantly double checking everything your partner does, that could be corrosive of trust as being one of the main ways that keeps people together. So you might think, oh, on the one hand, that would have the following obvious benefits of everyone knowing what's going on, but it might have more sort of deeper bad consequences of just... It's the same kind of argument people make about nuptial agreements, that a marriage contract, in principle, on paper it looks okay, but if it is an indication of, or a cause of, lack of trust between the partners, then that's not a good sign of a steady and successful marriage.
I think that this shows just how thoroughly the psychology of men is suppressed in our society. The very idea of having a paternity test is defined by how she might feel, how the kid might feel, what it means for the relationship, what it means for trust, etc., etc. It seems that men will not demand fair rights, whereas women won't shut up about them.
But I also think women should have a right to choose, and they should have a right to control their body, and that they should have an alternative, something that's safe.
Let me understand it, though. Can I understand it?
Why should a man have to keep himself ignorant and vulnerable in order to have a trustful relationship, when women make no equivalent sacrifice?
If I take my mother's generation, my mother didn't know how much money my father earned. She had only the vaguest idea of what it was that he did for a living. He had very little to say to her. She lived on the money she was allowed to have.
If it's oppressive that a woman doesn't know where she stands financially and has to have blind faith in her husband, then how much more oppressive is it that a man doesn't know he's a father and has to have blind faith in his wife? Faith that's all too often misplaced.